Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Velero community meeting slash open discussion. Today is June 29th, 2021. Please add yourself to the attended list with your affiliation listed as well. We're going to dive into some status updates. Then we have discussion topics and some shoutouts. So first off, we're going to get started with Dave.
Yeah, it looks like we have a lot of status this week. So yeah, I'm still working on the upload progress. Beijing team bring up. I've been working on some POC stuff on the Astrolabe side, moving disks and things, and I'll get back to doing code reviews this week. That's pretty much it for me.
Awesome. Any help needed with any of the code reviews?
No, we'll set things up. I think Carlicia is still around to help me on some of those things as well. So let's roll forward.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Dave? All right. That was super quick. So let's dive into some discussion topics. Dylan.
Hey, so we have been kind of digging into the Velero end-to-end tests and trying to figure out, well, we had a set of requirements for testing components on our end that we would like to kind of re-leverage the Velero end-to-end testing framework, since Velero is kind of part of our stack. And digging into how the current Velero end-to-end tests are written, there's an open PR up from Carlicia that refactors them a bit. And one of the changes that she's making in that PR is to remove the ability to even specify a single namespace to install Velero in, which is fine, but it actually kind of isn't even the core issue of what we need changed. We were trying to figure out, like, why can't we supply to the end-to-end tests an instance of Velero to run the test suite against, right?
You can.
Instead of having the end-to-end tests actually run through the install
portion,
we would like to just be able to kind of.
You can.
Yeah. Is that true with Carlicia's change, where each test
We're
gets its
not-
own?
So we haven't merged Carlicia's change. It hasn't gone through review yet. So I don't know that so I need to go through it with her. So like, there's no reason to have a different namespace for Velero to get installed in, and have that change every time. I think she's fixing a problem that doesn't really exist.
Okay. Yeah, I was under the impression that there was some race condition that she was trying to solve by doing that, but I'm not sure.
So the only race condition that might occur there is that the Velero uninstall doesn't happen fast enough. But what we should be doing is waiting for it to uninstall properly, because the uninstall is part of the test. And making sure uninstall works properly is part of it. So there's a flag, ---- install Velero equals false,
Okay.
which you can pass to the Ginkgo tests. And that says don't install and don't uninstall.
Yep.
And that's specifically there so that you don't, so that you can work against a running Velero. And that's a key part of the design for the tests, because, if you have your own setup that you want to run the tests against, you don't want it like overriding it or whacking it with something else.
Right.
Okay, yeah. And part of our concern, which is why you brought this up, was that PR of hers was actually removing that option.
Yeah, so that PR has not been merged,
Sure, got it.
and I agree with your concern. So thanks for bringing those. So that's three of us who say this is the way it should be.
Yeah. So that helps, because we kind of did feel like that was a bad design decision, mainly because an end-to-end test suite shouldn't necessarily rely on the install bits.
No.
So okay, that's good to know. So if we're on the same page there, we can depend upon the install Velero flag still being there, and we can set it to false. And kind of what we're thinking is, we were looking at, when I was digging through the end-to-end tests, a lot of them kind of seem provider specific, which is okay, because there's obviously a lot of provider specific kind of edge cases that you want to test with Velero?
Parts are provider specific. I mean, there's only like 4 tests, so.
Right. Yeah. I didn't mean to imply it was like thousands. So what we were hoping to do is, because, there's a lot of tests that are basically, I guess what you call conformance testing. So we would like to add testing to say like, hey, here's what a resource looks like pre-backup. We run the
Yes.
backup, run the disaster scenario, run the restore.
Yes.
Does the resource match the expected restore?
Yes. That sounds really great.
Okay. So we have a lot of that belongs upstream because it would be testing native Kubernetes resources. And then we also have a set of tests that would need to test kind of the OpenShift specific edge cases here that probably doesn't necessarily belong in the Velero repo. But if I guess I'm just kind of bringing this all up to say that we're going to start devoting some resources to writing those tests. So if we're all on the same page that we can keep this install Velero flag
Yes.
for the E2E tests, then we will probably have a few resources devoted to doing that and contributing that back upstream. So that's good to know. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of that install flag. So I can add a comment on that PR as well, just mentioning, we need that flag to still be there. And so that would kind of be a breaker for us.
Right.
And then if we're on the same page there, then I think we're in good shape to kind of move forward on our end.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, we would really appreciate that and welcome that. Yeah, as far as the cloud specific nature, I guess there's 2 pieces to it. I mean, one is you have to have an object store plugin to do a backup. And so, we have to set which object store it is. AWS is kind of the default for, handling Minio or what have you. And then the Kibishi tests allocate persistent volumes. And so they need a storage class. And default didn't always cut it. So, but if you don't run those, then there's no reason to specify what the cloud platform is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that also kind of gets into like for example, right now, if I don't define an object storage and Velero starts up, I believe its default behavior is to crash loop, right?
Yeah, I think it's something like that. I mean, whatever it is, I mean, it's not going to work.
Right. And I understand that, but I mean, I think that's kind of gets into the testing thing where like it really shouldn't crash in that case, right? I mean, it should be supplying some status info back to the user to say like, hey, we're missing some set of configuration.
Yes.
So
that would be much nicer. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hoping as we go through this process, we can harden things like that, because that's anything that would break the pattern of an end-to-end test suite that can run against some, some single instance of Velero. That's kind of what I noticed, is that it seems like the whole install uninstall pattern is to prevent misconfiguration from crashing the server, right? We would kind of want to like tease what all those things are and then start fixing it, right?
Well, it's one is the make sure that it's configured correctly, which it's a pain to like go through and do all the configuration by hand every time. So that's one of the reasons. The other is so that we don't have any state left over that carries between tests.
Sure.
And one, it might break the next test, or worse, tests start becoming dependent on each other. And because test A did something, test B passes. So we want to avoid that situation. But there's certainly room to be flexible here. I mean, it's pretty early stages for this stuff. So we can think about different ways, and definitely having Velero come up and report status like, hey, I started, but this configuration is missing, therefore it won't work. That's a much better thing than simply crashing. But crashing says that, well, you got to fix it out, go figure it out. So it's better than leaving it there non-functional and no status. So we've already got that issue, like like even like the plugins come up and you give them bad credentials. They don't check the credentials as part of startup. So you don't find out that the credentials are bad until you actually run your first backup. There's a bunch of places we can improve.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. Well, great. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page with this install flag, and then I will probably have. I'll leave a comment on Carlisi's PR, just mentioning that we kind of want to keep that in. and
Yeah, let's coordinate on test writing because as the Beijing team spins up, they're going to be concentrating initially on things like automating the test execution and also bringing up some tests. So if we can collaborate a bit, make sure, maybe we get like issues put in for tests that you're planning to write, and they can put in tests. And, we've got the community meeting that's more Asia friendly. If we could have somebody pop in there, or we can do it by Slack or whatever. But let's see if we can get kind of a coherent set of tests that are being written.
yeah, that sounds great. I'll make sure that whatever we do end up starting on, we'll make sure there's issues open around it, and then we can get someone to join the Asia friendly meeting, and make sure that we're keeping you guys up to date on that.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Before I kind of wrap up, anyone from our team that's on the call, did I miss anything that we needed out of this? It sounded like that was kind of the big concern, was the install flag. So if we can keep that, I think we have enough to move forward and start kind of making sure we get the requirements in on our end. And
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing we talked about, which I think is less important now that we're preserving the ability to run against an existing install, is that it would be nice to be able to do the inline test where the test installs and have it succeed if the cluster happens to be an OpenShift cluster. And I know there's the RESTIC permission issue that we may need to fix around that, but that seems less important than the other, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the install to me is part of the end-to-end testing, and I actually want to change it so that it's calling the Velero command line rather than the internals.
Yeah, and the issue we hit with using an OpenShift cluster there is just that RESTIC has to, there are permissions issues with the RESTIC daemon set in an OpenShift environment where we have to set an SEC around that. And it'd be nice to be able to get the install to be able to do that if the cluster happens to be an OpenShift cluster. But
yeah, I mean, would that be something that makes sense to just have it automatically? Can we automatically detect an OpenShift cluster and have install always do this? Because that seems reasonable to me.
That might be the way to go there, because then we wouldn't have to add this extra cluster type or whatever. I mean, an OpenShift cluster in one sense is kind of like a kind cluster for install, where you'd have to tell it use AWS for storage. It's not an AWS cluster, but you need to use AWS for your storage or whatever.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of easy installs and correct installs without like having to read the manual.
Yeah.
So anything we can do that makes that better, if we can come up with even if it's like some special casing there in the installer, I'm not really against that. We probably want to make sure the Helm chart does the same thing too. But yeah, I mean, let's figure out a way to make this work, because I think it makes a lot more sense to just have it. Velero install should be figuring out more and more stuff. We should try to have a painless install experience, and not only painless but correct, because the real danger is you installed it, it doesn't quite work, and your backups are forked, and you don't find that out until it's restore time, and that's really a bad experience.
And not only for OpenShift SEC, but for PSP as well, right? On the VMware TKGM platforms.
Yeah, and we've run into some issues, where it's like, actually like RESTIC paths, so where host path volumes, I think it's like where they get mounted, that's actually changed between different Kubernetes installs. So like our TKGI version of Kubernetes puts the host path somewhere different, and that has to get fixed. Or Velero needs to get set properly to handle that. So yeah.
Just a quick question on conformance, because I heard you talk about conformance here as well. Has anyone looked into Sonobuoy for conformance testing? Is that relevant here at all?
We haven't looked at it yet. It might be worthwhile. I think Bridget's kind of an expert on Sonobuoy, so we can ping her on that when she's back. I got a ping from somebody. I can't remember exactly what it was the other day, but they were asking for integration, I think, between Velero and Sonoboy. I wasn't quite sure what they were thinking of. I have to follow up with them, but maybe that's like part of the restore process, is making sure the cluster is healthy.
Yeah, so they have these plugins where you can add in more things that Sonoboy would check for. So they check for the standard like 4,000 Kubernetes end-to-end tests. But then you can add other things that they could check for. So an easy way would be like to add a Velero plugin here. So we can run a Sonoboy check and say, yes, this Velero setup is conformant.
That's not a bad idea.
Because it already has all the underpinnings and everything. So it might be
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, not just conformant, but healthy.
Yeah, yeah. Great. That conversation wrapped up. Any other questions, comments around this? All right. Then if we don't have any other discussion topics, we only have one thing left to do today, and that is the shout outs. So the shout outs today go to Genting for bumping the version of the Helm chart up to version 161. So thank you for that. And that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for the discussions. Have a fantastic rest of the week, everyone, and talk to you all soon. Bye, folks.
Thanks. And this is 4th of July weekend, right? Happy 4th
Yes.
of July for everybody here in the US.
Report.
Yes.